WBNE.
Hello, and welcome to episode 157, all about the Silmarillion, chapter 17, of the coming of the men into the West, being the 157th part of That's What I'm Tolkien About. Hello, my name is Mary Clay. If that's too complicated for you, just call me MC. I've been experiencing the world of J.R.R. Tolkien for the first time, and right now I am reading the Silmarillion, so you don't have to. Today I'm joined by Anex Wilson, also known as FantasyAnex on TikTok. Welcome!
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on. I've been saying that anyone who is nice and fun and creative within this Tolkien creator part of the internet that I've found gets to come on the podcast, especially if they're willing to talk about the Silmarillion. So
anytime.
There's not a lot. Not everyone is into the Silmarillion, so that's bonus points for you.
It's a tough book. It's a reread book. Is what I call it. At least twice. Yeah.
It's really funny you say that because I do not think I will ever be reading the Silmarillion again. And I'm sure that's blasphemy for a lot of people to hear, but
it's got its rough chapters, but maybe when you finish it, we'll see. We'll see how you feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll see. Well, before we dive into the chapter, why don't you tell me and the listeners a little bit about your history with Tolkien and Lord of the Rings? How did you first get introduced to it?
So I guess it's a bit strange for someone of my age, but my introduction was the books. When I was around 11, I read The Hobbit because I was sort of reading epic fantasy, and my school librarian was like, this is a good book that you should read. So I read The Hobbit, and I loved it. I thought it was a brilliant children's story, and I thought, great. And then I read The Lord of the Rings and hated it because I was I was going in expecting The Hobbit, and it was not that. But I had this weird sort of determination of like, I'm going to read this whole thing if it kills me. So I did. I finished it, and I guess it was that attitude that like made me hate it. So then I never watched the film because I thought this is a boring story of people walking around, then they throw a ring in a fire, and like, what's the point? So yeah, I had friends who were like, you need to watch Lord of the Rings. And I was like, no, I'm not doing it. Until it was like a summer, maybe 3 or 4 years after. And I was really bored, and I was like, fine, I'll put this thing on. And I got obsessed. I watched all 3 films in like 2 days, and I was like, okay, now I need to read the books again because this is an interesting story and I know what to expect. So then I went back to the books, and I was like, oh, I get it now. Okay, the language makes sense. Like the characters make sense because I knew the story is like, you know, these 1,000 names for like 1,000 places. I get it. And yeah, that's how I got obsessed with Lord of the Rings after hating it for like 4 years. It was yeah.
Well, I have a little bit of a similar story with that because I don't know what it was. For some reason, I just never watched the movies growing up. Like none of my friends were really into it, so it just totally missed me. So the first time I ever watched Fellowship of the Ring was for a film class in college. And I thought it was just the stupidest movie in the world. I was like, this is so dumb. There's like too many characters. A bunch of them like either sound like the names sound alike or they look alike. In my head, I had meshed Aragorn and Boromir into the same person, and
that's valid.
It was it was just so confusing, and I didn't realize that like the trilogy climax was going to be destroying the ring. I thought that they were going to destroy the ring in the first movie, and then like the rest of the movies were going to be about like things that happened afterwards or whatever for some reason. And they, you know, there was like 5 minutes left, and I was like, oh, that's not happening. What a pointless movie. So, and then, several years later, I got the idea for this podcast and came around on it again, and found it much more enjoyable the second time. So, yeah.
I mean, I had a friend who I dragged to a Lord of the Rings marathon, like an all-night marathon, that one of the theaters in London does. The Prince Charles does a all-night marathon like twice a year. And I dragged him to it because he had never seen it. He's a film buff, and he sees like all of the Oscar like films, but he's never seen Lord of the Rings. And I was like, it won all the Oscars. You need to see this. And he didn't like Fellowship. He after the film ended, he was like, is the whole thing like this? I was like, no, just keep watching. And then he loved Two Towers, and he's like, that was a much better film. I was like, yeah, maybe it takes a while to get into it, but then you get to the end and the climax it just gets you.
It's pretty good. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. Like no matter what your feelings or thoughts are on any of the movies or like which one's better or which one's quote unquote the worst, because none of the 3 Lord of the Rings movies are bad movies, but everyone has their personal rankings. Arguably, I don't know if this is as powerful stuff. I'm trying to transition us into the Silmarillion.
Seamless.
So good. So this is chapter 17 of The Coming of the Men into the West. And we've been waiting for these guys for a while now. Again, this is chapter 17. So it's been a while since we knew that there would be, obviously, us as Lord of the Rings fans, we know that men are going to play some part at some point because we have the existence of Aragorn and Boromir and whatnot. Yes. But they're mentioned like in, I think even like the first section before we even go into the official start of the chapters, that there's going to be elves and there's going to be men and they're the children of Iluvatar. And there were some, I think a couple chapters ago, there's this random chapter that's just that's of men, and it's like 2 pages long. And it mostly just talks about how much better elves are than men. So
the Silmarillion is interesting because the in-world explanation for the book is that Bilbo wrote it, or it's stories collected from the stuff that the elves tell Bilbo when he's at like Rivendell, and it's stories that he collects and just put into the Red Book of Westmarch. It's a lore of the elves. So I think it's a really valid reason for why the whole thing is about elves and how awesome they are and how amazing they are, and why dwarves suck for the most part, and they look down on dwarves. And then the men come in and they do some cool stuff, and some of them are relevant, but it's the elves. It's all about the elves. I think that's a really interesting in-world explanation for a whole book about the amazing elves.
Yes, totally. And there are definitely parts of this chapter, too, where that comes in, where I'm like, yeah, I can tell this is told from the perspective of elves. So it begins with, who's it? I want to make sure I'm talking about the right F-named elf. Finrod has been hunting and traveling with Maglor and Maedhros, but then he gets kind of tired, so he goes off on his own and ends up into the north of Osiriand. But it's really funny because it takes Tolkien like 3 sentences to describe all the different paths he went and the places he went by and the directions, only to say he came into the north of Osiriand, because he wants you to know exactly the path that he took.
Yes, yeah. It's setting the scene. Is Tolkien goes on about it a lot, and I feel like he was so proud of his world building, of his like naming places and how close and how, everything's relation to each other. He's like, I want you to know this because I worked on this so hard. Actually, you know what? That's so true. I've never really thought about it from that perspective of like, he works so hard on these, and so he's going to use them. Yeah, he's going to say all the names. He's going to tell you the names.
Yes. And so into the north of Osiriand, he sees light in the evening, and far off he heard the sound of song. And he thought at first maybe this was the green elves because they live in that area, but the sounds and the songs that he's hearing are not what elves would be singing. And eventually he sees a group of people who are not elves. These are the men. And they're all kind of gathered together, and their leader is Beor the Old, and he is their chieftain. And this dude and like his lineage of people will be very important. Yeah. And we'll get to that lineage in towards the end of the chapter. But
family tree needed very much.
Oh my gosh.
Visual aids everywhere. Yeah.
Finrod, this is where I was like, maybe this is just because I'm a woman, but this seems really creepy what he does. And like, it would terrify me if I was there and this happened. So he watches them from a distance, like hiding in the trees, waits for them to fall asleep. And as he's watching them, it says a love for them stirred in his heart. So nothing is malicious here. But it just seems just so odd to me. And so he waits for them to fall asleep and then goes and sits beside their fire and takes up it mentions a rude harp of Beor's. And I just think that's funny that like the elves would note when like this is a rudimentary harp. This isn't as good as the harps that we have.
It's a whole sense of, I think it's interesting you mention what like Finrod does, because I think it's him seeing the humans as like, so almost like children of, you're not quite at our level yet. So, they have a rude harp and, they sing some rudimentary music and their music is harsh and it's not as nice as ours. So it's really not weird to Finrod that he should, watch them from the trees and then go amongst them, because they're like lesser children who's not at the level of the elves. But yeah, it's definitely...
Yes, totally.
Because he's Finrod, it's less creepy, but any other person it would be.
Yes, yeah. So yes, he plays music and it wakes up the men and they all look upon him with wonder, and the music that they listen to is so beautiful because it's nothing that they've heard before, because it's elven music, and because it says wisdom was in the words of the elven king, and the hearts grew wiser that hearkened to him. For the things of which he sang, of the making of Arda and the bliss of Aman beyond the shadows of the sea, came as clear visions before their eyes. And his elvish speech was interpreted in each mind according to its measure. So the music is their first point of connection and communication with each other, which is a very beautiful sentiment in and of itself. Yeah.
And it's very thematic for like Tolkien's universe in general. The music is a thing that connects people. But I wanted to ask, how do you interpret how Finrod's music like works? Do you think there's a sort of magic to it? Like, because he says that everyone understood what he was saying in their own language and in their own sense. So do you think there was magic in what he was doing, or is it just elven music is wonderful?
I wasn't sure how to interpret all that, because I was like, is there like mind reading going on here? Like what's going on? And it is kind of interesting the way that like they're able to communicate, because they have different languages. And even though I think it mentions that the men they do know some Quindi because they came from the East. But yeah, I was like, is there mind reading going on? It does very much seem like there's some kind of supernatural element almost to this. Where I guess that's just the quality of elvish music. I don't know. It's really interesting. Yeah, so the men are super impressed with Finrod. They think, in fact, that he is one of the Valar, because they've heard of the Valar in their travels. And this is what a lot of people presume is why they're traveling in this direction, is they're looking for the Valar. Finrod hangs out with them for a while and connects with them and learns who they are, and they learn from each other. We learn more about Beor and how he's leading his people over into the west and over the mountains that are, if you're looking at that dreaded map, if you're looking at that map at the back of a book or online or something, there's a range of mountains all the way on the right side of the map. And so that's where they have just crossed over. The Ered Luin, also called Ered Linden for absolutely no reason. There we go.
Which confused me so much. The first time.
I don't know what the name is, but I was like, I'm sure he will know what the name is.
I've been working on the maps particularly recently, because I was sort of creating for this Dungeons and Dragons campaign, I was creating a character who was making a journey west, and I was like, so the maps are really fresh in my mind, because I was like, he would have crossed that mountain, and then he would have went there, and then he went there. But yeah, I remember it confusing me the first time, because it mentions at the start about Ered Linden, and I was like, and in my head that mountain is always called Ered Luin, or the Blue Mountains. So yeah, it was really confusing, and I remember going back to the map, and it just says in brackets Ered Linden. So he could. It's Tolkien with naming things 4 different, and then changing the name partway through because a story happened there.
Yes, totally. Oh my gosh. Beor shares that they were coming over in this direction. Finrod asks him about the arising of men, so I guess how they came to be and their journeys, and Beor didn't say much because he didn't know that much.
Yeah.
Because obviously I was assuming that, Beor was probably, he might not have even been born when the first men were originally came into Middle Earth, but it's the fathers of his people were they didn't say exactly what happened or talk about their past.
Yeah, because this is happening about 300 years after, right? It's 300 years after they landed.
Yes, yeah, thank you for...
Yeah.
Yeah, it says at the very beginning, when 300 years or more were gone since the Noldor came to Beleriand. Yeah. So that's our timeline of where we are, yeah.
So Beor would in that case be like a 4th or a 5th generation human, because humans awoke when the sun came up. Which is when the Noldor sort of landed and there was a battle, and then the sun came up and there was a fight and the orcs ran away from the sun. So 300 years after that event, meaning, so yeah, Beor, at this point, I don't, dates aren't my thing, like exact timelines, but yeah, I would presume Beor is sort of 4th or 5th generation at least, like earliest 5th generation human. So yeah, he would just be hearing a lot of very old stories. And, we know that humans weren't exactly law masters keeping records for thousands of years like elves were. So I think it's, very reasonable that he just doesn't know. He's heard bits and pieces from his forefathers, but it's not really that important to him or to the humans like it is for the elves.
Right, yeah. It's also hard to keep track of timelines and whatnot when you have like hundreds of years passing with like the turn of a page. So it's always hard. And then the introduction of these characters now that have a much shorter lifespan is going to complicate our timelines and perception. Maybe I shouldn't even say timeline, but like perception of time as you read the Silmarillion. It's very hard to keep track of. Yeah. So he says, a darkness lies behind us, and we have turned our backs upon it, and we do not desire to return thither even in thought. So they don't even want to talk much about what they've left behind. He says, westwards our hearts have been turned, and we believe that there we shall find light. And I wanted to be like, well, bad news for you. Something happened, awkward, where the like true light kind of got sucked out of everything.
Yeah, your information is outdated. It's coming from the elves who were told there were light and decided not to go there. And as far as they're aware, there's still light. But nope, it's someone sucked it all up.
Yeah, that's so true that they would have heard it from, the supposed dark elves, which that always confuses me when I'm reading this, because you see dark elf and you're like, oh, that means they're evil. But it just, in this sense, means that they were not the elves that saw the light of Valinor for themselves. So it's more literal rather than metaphorical. But it was the dark elves who would have said, oh yeah, we heard, like maybe a couple thousand years ago, we heard this rumor and then a bunch of our people left, but we weren't sure about it. So we stayed behind. But I mean, hey, you can go find it if you want.
And then it's unlucky for them that they came too late.
Yeah. And so obviously this darkness that lies behind them, or maybe not even obviously, but I think naturally Finrod hearing this would be like, that probably has something to do with Melkor. Like, this is Melkor or Morgoth's doing. And we do get a little update on what Morgoth has been doing. And this was when I realized, we haven't really talked or heard what he's been up to. Because I think the last we really heard of him was several chapters ago, whichever chapter it was, where Feanor dies. And that's when it mentions that there's this huge, like 100-year-long siege of Angband. And that's kind of the last we've heard about Morgoth and what he's been up to.
Yeah.
We do learn that he left secretly under shadow. He departed from Angband, and he left Sauron in command. And he went over into the east to try and do something with the men, whatever his plan was. It was just to get to them first, I guess, And it says, to corrupt or destroy whatsoever arose new and fair was ever the chief desire of Morgoth.
So, yeah, he's sort of trying to do the same thing he did to the elves, because he was the first to find the elves as well. And, he turned them into orcs and he captured them, and it was sort of his temptations and his lies that made a bunch of them stay behind. And was like, we don't trust this entirely. So yeah, he's sort of trying to do the same to men, and I suppose he succeeded in a sense, because most of them stayed behind. And only these 3 houses of men, like the Beor and the Haladin and the Manak, the people, they're the only ones who really come over, right? So yeah, he's sort of trying to destroy them like he did elves, or try to do with elves, really.
Yeah, and I think whatever he would have done too, this, darkness that Beor mentions and the fathers of his people, yeah, it says a silence had fallen upon their memory. So clearly whatever Morgoth was doing over there was very, impactful for their lives. And I mean, can you imagine though, you like all of a sudden wake up into existence and then that's a very different experience than being born as a baby and slowly being like all of a sudden you're just like, I can't imagine like in my adult body being dropped into a world being like, what just happened? Where am I? And then this like force of darkness, you don't even know the concept of like who the Valar are yet, and or that they're elves, or and then this force of darkness comes up and does something that is probably like really, scary and traumatizing. Whatever Morgoth did over there, he doesn't really stay long, because he knows that back over by Angband, the power and the union of the Eldar is growing stronger, and they are more in number than the men, and so they're kind of the bigger threat, and he needs to turn his attention back over there. Yeah. So he goes back to Angband and leaves the men alone.
Can we say on the topic, I love Tolkien's language. I love how he writes. Although I think it takes a bit of time to get used to, but his language is amazing. And silence had fallen on their memories is one of the best ways to say they forgot. It's amazing. It's so good.
I was more interpreting that as like, oh no, we don't, like in Canto, we don't talk about Bruno, oh no, we don't talk about, we don't talk about what happened.
Yeah, I think, I read it as sort of, they didn't like to remember, so they didn't keep stories of it. They didn't tell stories of it. So over generations, they wiped it. Like, we don't want to talk about it. So I think it started out as, like you said, we don't talk about Bruno. And then because they don't, over a couple generations, it's forgotten. And I think silence had fallen on their memories is such a good phrase. That every time I read it, it sticks in my head. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, Tolkien does have, and that's what frustrates me a lot when over the course of this podcast, where the moments where I am frustrated because, oh my gosh, he took a whole paragraph just to get to saying he went into the north of Osirian. And, he has a whole chapter describing a map and like some of the infuriating things he does. But then he has such a way with words in other parts where I'm just like, that's just so amazing, and you just don't read anything like that these days. Yeah. And that's what sometimes infuriates me, where I'm like, man, but he's so good. He's so good at what he did. So
yeah, no one writes like that anymore. It's definitely a product of his time. Like fantasy written like that now, I don't think would sell. It was a time when fantasy could be as flowery and like big and weird and like epic as it could be, because I think now it's a lot more like digestible fantasy with like characters and themes and like relationships. But back then it was just like a flowery language, and we can have Aragorn who just has gone through his character arc and doesn't really need to change anymore. But the language is amazing, and that's what sells the book. Also, interesting point to note that the elves, without meaning to, saved the humans. Like, their presence in the West is what forced, because if they hadn't been so strong, Morgoth would have stayed.
Yeah.
Morgoth would have stayed there, and because he had to leave and leave his lesser servants behind to corrupt the men. It didn't work as well. So the elves, without meaning to, their war saved the humans.
Very true. Yes, totally. Finrod learns from them that there are other men, as you mentioned, these two other, families or houses of men that have traveled, and some of them are still on the other side of the mountains, or other ones that they were originally ahead of Beor, and then Beor's men passed them. The Halidin, so the Halidin are still on the eastern slopes of the mountain. I love this, awaiting tidings before they venture further. So they're like, we'll let you guys go first. You let us know what's over there, and then we'll come hang out.
Come back and tell us.
And then is that the family that's ruled by Marach?
Marach is a third one. Marach is the big group of sort of like
he's the
warlike.
Third one. Okay, yeah. And then there's a third separate family ruled by someone named Marach. And we're also going to hear a lot about like his son and his grandson and the grandson of his grandson. So, however, the green so we have these three families. It sounds like Beor is the first of the men to get over here, and then we'll see when the other two families decide to show up, when they're like, okay, they've been over there long enough, maybe it's safe for us to come now.
Yeah. Either they're all dead or they're all safe. Yeah. Because I don't imagine Beor sent messengers back being like, hey, it's safe to come over. I don't know if that happened.
I was like, would you? I don't know if I was being sent as, the guinea pig. Yeah. I don't know that I would send a message back being like, yeah, it's safe, come on over. I think I would just be like, no, they can figure it out. We had to figure it out. They can figure it out too. So the green elves, however, were not, Finrod was very happy to see the men, and, it says that at first sight, basically, a love for them stirred in his heart. That is not the same for the green elves. It just says they were troubled by the coming of men. They tell Finrod, hey, tell these people to go back to where they came from. Otherwise, we're going to fight them, and we're going to force them to go back to where they came from.
Yeah.
Finrod relates this message to Beor and is like, hey, I recommend that we, your people move along to a different area because the green elves are not happy to have you here. Real quick, can you explain to me who exactly the green elves are? Because all the different factions of the elves, of like, I know the Vanyar, the Noldor, and the Teleri, and then some of the Teleri are Sindar, and so can you explain quickly who the green elves are? Because I don't remember exactly.
This isn't my forte, but as far as I can remember, the Teleri who stayed behind, well, the ones who did make the journey but then were delayed in different places. There were a bunch of them who were delayed before when they saw the Blue Mountains, the Ered Luin. They were delayed there because they were too scared to cross it. So a lot of them stayed behind in Eriador. And then at some point, a bunch of them crossed over into Assyria and like lived in those regions. So I believe the Green Elves were a group split off from the Nandor Elves. So yeah, it's
okay.
Yeah, so they were the ones who stayed behind and then later made the journey into Beleriand over the mountains and settled and never went really far into the lands, as far as sort of like Thingol's people did, or the Grey Elves, or the Elves of the Havens did. The Green Elves sort of stayed in this corner of Beleriand and never really ventured as far to the ocean. Yeah, so they stayed near the rivers of Assyria.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that explanation. Maybe I'll also have a follow-up message to on TikTok, Wizard Waychris, who is kind of
they're
obsessed with the elves.
They are the expert,
their stuff. Beor and his people move, I think it's northern into the lands of Amrod and Amros. near to the border, or maybe they go west, whatever, near to the borders of Doriath, which, remember, everyone, is Thingol and Melian's forest, essentially.
Yeah, they sort of go northwest a bit from where they are. Yeah, because they were sort of in the middle, and then they sort of travel west and then a bit north to around the forests of Doriath.
Okay. They establish a land there called Estelad, the encampment. And so that's where a lot of them end up staying for a while. However, Beor, when Finrod is like, okay, I've spent a while with y'all, I'm going back to my own people, Beor begs to come with him. And he does, and he remained in the service of the king of Nargothrond while his life lasted, which I think is a huge testament to the kind of person that Beor is, that Finrod, this elf, the king of Nargothrond, who has this, Finrod has command over like a really powerful big realm of Beleriand. And for him to say, yeah, human that I just met, a couple months ago or a year ago, why don't you come with me? And the fact that there was like no drama or anything that resulted in Beor being, killed or being like, no, you got to leave now. We're kicking you out or something. The fact that he remained in his service for the rest of his life, I think is really important to the kind of man he is, and I guess maybe the people that he's led. Yeah,
it's one of the first examples of, I don't know, he's not officially named that, but it's one of the first examples of an elf friend, which we see throughout Lord of the Rings, of like, Gimli's an elf friend, and Aragorn is an elf friend, and Frodo's like named an elf friend, and it's like a big deal to be, you are not an elf, but you're close enough. Like, we count you as nearly one of us. And Beor is one of the first examples of like a human who is brought in, and it's like, you're good enough that you reach nearly our level. And he's Finrod's best friend.
Yeah, and actually, his human name is Balin.
Yeah, now we find out.
I don't know how to. That sounds so similar to the dwarf in the Hobbit, but it's spelled Balan. And then the elves rename him Beor. So yeah, that's a huge sign that he is an elf friend for a lifelong elf friend.
I just find it funny that we were never told that until now. We were told his elf name this whole time, and I was like, that was never his name, guys. It was Balan, and then Beor is the name he took.
They just introduce him automatically with like the name that they gave him, rather than like, this was Balin, but the elves called him Beor.
Once again, totally written from the perspective of the elves.
Yes. Yeah. Beor's people, they've gone to Estelad, and he is serving Finrod. Meanwhile, the next group of people to come over are the Halidin. They did run into the Green Elves. Whoops. I love this. It says, meeting the unfriendship, which, again, going back to how you say, Tolkien's way with words, and also the fact that this is written from the perspective of elves, that's a very kind way. They're like, meeting like the hostility of the Green Elves, but they don't want to throw their brethren under the bus and be like, they weren't very welcoming. Like, so they just use the word unfriendship.
They fully said get out, but they were like, no, they were just unfriendly. Not horrible, they were just unfriendly.
Unfriendly, yeah. The Halidin go into the country of Caranthir, who is one of Feanor's sons. I love it. It just says the people of Caranthir paid little heed to them. So they're okay that they're there, but they're not going to care about them that much. And then Merrick, I love this. Now that he's heard word that the people of Beor have safely found like a really nice place to live, green and fertile land. They're like, okay, now we'll come over.
I wonder who told them. I wonder how they found out.
Yeah. Where do they go? They
go just south of Estelad.
Yeah, and they eventually find Beren, son of Beor. So this is our first. We're we've been here long enough now that the men are having sons who are growing up to be their own leaders and whatnot, and they'll have grandsons that are also key players in this section too. So they have a good friendship between them. Finrod returns to see the men quite often and forms a good friendship with them. This is where we learn that the men, also named the Atani, the second people, are also called the Edain?
Edain. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So Edain doesn't refer to all men, actually. It's a reference to just these three houses.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's a specific men who came over the mountain to Beleriand and like met the elves and like had a friendship with the elves and later helped them. It's a reference to only these three. Yeah,
it says it was there used only of the three kindreds of the elf friends. Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, you're correct. Yeah. Fingolfin, who, reminder everyone, is the second son of Finwë. He is, Feanor died over here. Their other brother, Finarfin, is still over in Valinor, so Fingolfin is their leader now. He sends messengers of welcome to the Edain. That's when they learn in particular. It says Malak, son of Merek. He stays with in Fingolfin's territory in Hithlum for a while and learns the Elven tongue, and he is given the name Eredin. And I think they use like his elven name kind of back and forth throughout this chapter, which gets confusing because it's like, wait, who are we talking about again? So he's kind of growing in kind of like with Beor, where he's, a trusted servant, advisor, or whatever, for Finrod.
His line becomes very important sort of later. Like we find out towards the end, his line produces like some of the most important people in this story much down the line.
I'll wait until we get to that part to say. Yeah. However, they do not stay very long in Estelad because many of them still want to go westward. They want to explore more. Again, they might have heard these stories of the light, and so they want to keep traveling and keep trying to maybe find a place that they're happier living. And some of the, let me see, I think it says
some of the people of Beor, the people of Beor went north. I was taking notes earlier as well.
I thought I read something that, because it says they did not know the way, and I thought I remembered reading that some of the elves guided them, but I think I just made that up.
I think they just traveled a lot. I think it says, they traveled a lot and just learned the way.
So they travel all around the different realms of Beleriand. Let's leave it at that. So we haven't heard from one of the other key elves in this story, Thingol. He is not very happy about all this going on because remember, a lot of them are around Doriath, and so they're not going into his realm, but they're getting near to it, and he's not sure how he feels about that, especially because even for the elves, he doesn't let all of the elves into his land. He's very picky in particular about just the elves coming in to see him.
I very much don't like Thingol. I
don't know how to feel about him.
I think you'll see his actions in some of the later stories, and you'll see Thingol was not a good person. Thingol, I mean, you could perceive his actions in different ways, but my reading of his actions is that he was not a good person. He was deeply mistrustful of strangers, and like that's what leads to his downfall at the end of. Yeah, Thingol made things challenging for people for absolutely no reason. Like, without Melian, it would have been a problem. Without Melian, he would not have survived.
Yes. Oh my gosh, 100%. Yeah. My thing, actually, let me just, read this one part. It says, he was ill-pleased about the men being there and being so close to him. He's not exactly happy, I guess, that the rest of the elves seem to be, making friends with the men. It says, he was troubled by dreams concerning the coming of men, ere ever the first tidings of them were heard. So he's been having these weird dreams about men literally since they heard that men were going to be a thing. So because of that, he says, into Doriath shall no man come into into Doriath shall no man come while my realm lasts. Not even those of the house of Beor who serve Finrod the Beloved. So, yeah, he's really cautious, really mistrustful. And a part of me is like, I don't exactly blame him just because he was really cautious about the Noldor coming. And a lot of that turned out to be very right because he found out that they killed his direct kin. You know, they were of the Teleri and they had that terrible battle with the Teleri where a lot of them were killed and slain. So I don't exactly blame him for being so cautious because his instincts about trusting the Noldor were somewhat correct. And they were also like, I think a lot of them are I don't think they're telling us the full truth. And then Galadriel eventually is like, yeah,
we did some bad stuff.
That.
Yeah, kinslaying. We killed a lot of your family. Sorry about that. That's fair. That's true. The Noldor. He was right to distrust the Noldor, but the Noldor are also the worst. They're terrible people. So that's fair. But I think his distrust extends to men and like everyone else to such an extent. And I think it's interesting that when he makes his declaration, like Melian doesn't say anything because Melian knows what's going to happen. You know, being a Maya, she has sort of not exactly, but the sense of like prophecy. And so she's like, sure, I'll let you make this declaration, but like, it's not going to stick. She knows it's not going to stick.
Yeah. And I was wondering how much of this was Melian because in a lot of instances where Thingol has been really cautious, we find out like a couple sentences later that it's like, well, Melian advised him to do this or that or shared this knowledge or shared this insight. So I was like, oh, is this actually Melian saying, you know, maybe we shouldn't trust these? But yeah, it says, after Thingol says this about the men, not even those of the house of Beor who served Finrod may come into our realm. It says, Melian said nothing to him at that time. But afterwards, she said to Galadriel, I love that like she confides in like her gal pal. Now the world runs swiftly to great tidings. And one of men, even of Beor's house, shall indeed come. And the girdle of Melian shall not restrain him, for doom greater than my power shall send him. And the songs that shall spring from that coming shall endure when all Middle Earth is changed. So that was like a really big statement, but also like really vague of like, yeah, something big is going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's all she says, really.
She says one of like men of even of Beor's house, but there's two that really come into goes through the girdle of Melian, and you know, like there's two stories that come out of it, and those two stories are, I think, without a doubt, the best two stories in the Silmarillion. And they're back to back of like of Beren and Luthien and of Turin Turambar. They're like the two best stories that when I said you don't want to reread this book, I think after you read those two stories, and they're big, like after you read those two stories, it's the sense of, oh, that's why Tolkien is such a good storyteller. That like they're amazing. They're back to back. One is so heartwarming and the other will destroy you because it's so tragic. Amazing. It's so tragic, but they're amazing. And yeah, she's right that those two stories endure. And you know, like Aragorn tells the story of Beren and Luthien later. So after all of these people are gone, their stories of the men who went through the girdle of Melian endures. So yeah, very accurate prophecy.
Yeah, everyone's really hyping up Beren and Luthien, so I hope it's
my favorite.
I mean, obviously I know the general story from, you know, knowing it from what Aragorn says in Lord of the Rings.
I think there's two types of people who read the Silmarillion, and it's the ones who think Beren and Luthien is the best story, and the ones who think Turin Turambar is the best story. Because they are so different, and
interesting.
Which one is your favorite tells a lot about you, and like what you prefer in literature.
I'll have to see what I think when I'm on the other side of those chapters. Yeah. So it seems like things are going a little too well for the men in Beleriand with the elves. You know, naturally, as these stories go in the Silmarillion, you know, things are happening. It says dissensions awoke among the Edain, in which the shadow of Morgoth may be discerned. For certain it is that he knew of the coming of the men into Beleriand and of their growing friendship with the elves. So by now, Morgoth knows that they're there. He knows that they're, forming friendships and alliances with with the elves. And he's like, that's not good for me. So he definitely starts, weaving his webs of deceit. Mm-hmm. They hold a council. Let's see, it just says, it's a council and assembly of men. So it's just men. I don't think elves are there. And a lot of it is like, it's only like we can't do anything about Morgoth. Like, what are we like? They know that there's this war and this darkness in the north where Angband is, where they've been having this siege of Angband, and they say only by the valor. I'd struggle saying valor because of the existence of the Valar. Mm-hmm. And so I want to because of the valor of the Eldar. There we go. Only by the valor of the Eldar is he restrained, and maybe it was for this purpose, to aid them at need, that we were brought into this land. So some of them are like, the Eldar are gonna be the ones to end Morgoth. Maybe we're brought here to help them, but like we're not gonna be able to do it. Bereg, who is of the house of Beor, says, let the Eldar look to it. Our lives are short enough, which I kind of laughed at. I was like, you know what? He's got a point.
He's got a point. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. The elves can afford to do this for centuries.
Yeah, I thought that was funny.
Humans can't.
Then there is Amlach, who is of the house of Amrock.
Marak.
Whatever that was. I've already forgotten. Says, all of this is but elvish lore, tales to beguile newcomers that are unwary. The sea has no shore. There is no light in the west. I mean, you're not technically wrong about the light in the west. Yeah. But I can't exactly blame that statement for saying this is elvish lore, tales to beguile newcomers, because that would make sense to me, that like you wake up in a new land and all of a sudden there are these people telling you all these like myths and legends that like, how do you know what's true if you've never seen it with your eyes? And at this point, this was like hundreds of years ago. So how do you, it's hard to know like what's true and what's not. And then this statement kind of gets a little bit harsher, saying that the elves are greedy, and that it says, let the orcs have the realm that is theirs and we will have ours, and like we have our place in the world, but the Eldar need to let us be, leave us alone.
Yeah.
So he says some like very intense things at this meeting. Mm-hmm. However, after the council, Amlach, among the, let's see, are they back with the Eldar at this point?
It doesn't really make clear, but it sort of just says the meeting ended, and at some point afterwards, Amlach came back to them and was like, that wasn't me. I wasn't there. What are you talking about? I never said those things. He
denied that he had been present at their debate or had spoken with such words as they had reported. And at first I was like, oh my God, is this like our new villain? Is he just like gaslighting them to be like, I didn't say that. What are you talking about? But no, it becomes clear then that this was Morgoth's doing. Mm-hmm. They're saying, you will now believe this at least. There is indeed a dark lord, and his spies and emissaries are among us. He fears us and the strength that we may give to his foes.
Yeah.
So somehow, so Morgoth is like really stepping up his game. Mm-hmm. Like he has somehow, dark magic or something to pose as one of them and say these words and try and sow seeds of deceit and dissent among everyone. And only by, Amlach being like, I wasn't there. What are you talking about? Like, they wouldn't have found out otherwise.
I can't help feeling that he made a mistake there. If you're going to send someone to pretend to be Amlach, then make sure that Amlach doesn't go back and reveal that was all lies. Like, if you're going to send someone to be Amlach, then get rid of the real Amlach. I'm not giving plans to Morgoth, but, that was a flaw in the plan of when Amlach goes back, everyone's going to figure out that it wasn't him.
Yeah, he didn't think it through all the
No.
way. They're all like, well, I guess this is, we weren't sure exactly like how serious this was or whether or not this was even true because we haven't seen it. But now this is proof enough that there is this Dark Lord and that he considers us and our relationship with the elves enough of a threat that he would do something to try and interfere with that. So some of them are like, yeah, you're right. Oh my gosh, we have to do something about this. And other ones say they are meddling in his quarrel with the kings of the Eldar to no gain of ours. So they're like, this is the elves' problem. Like, this is their battle. And any involvement that any way that we get involved is not going to end well for us. There's nothing for us to gain. Some of them leave more south. It says, and they passed out of the songs of those days. So I guess they're just out. They're like, we're done with this. Bye.
I think there are some theories of what happened to them. Because in The Lord of the Rings, they're not exactly the Harad, but there are some people who live south of Gondor. The exact name for them doesn't come to my mind. But that they could be the descendants of the people that Beric took south. Or they just mingled with the Harad and just joined them. But yeah, it's a fun phrase. They passed out of the stories. Like, they still live somewhere, but they're just not relevant anymore.
Yeah. However, Amlach, who was the one that Morgoth or one of his servants impersonated at the council, he now has a bone to pick with Morgoth. And he says, I have now a quarrel of my own with this master of lies, which will last to my life's end. He goes and enters the service of Maedhros. Some people, go back over the mountains, back into the east, and are forgotten, is what it says. So, they're just not important to the story anymore.
The ones who agreed with fake Amlach, and then when he came back and was like, that wasn't me, the ones who were like, yeah, but the fake you still made a good point. Like, this is not our business, So they were like, yeah, even if that was Morgoth, he's got a point. And then they left.
Yeah. I mean, even though Morgoth's plan to impersonate Amlach was found out, Morgoth still, won in some capacity,
He did manage to split them up to an extent. Yeah.
So the Haladin are, doing their thing, but Morgoth, he's seen what he can do to meddle with the elves and men. So he continues doing this, and he sends an orc raid to the Haladin. And it says they did not live under the rule of lords or many together, but each homestead was set apart and governed its own affairs, and they were slow to unite. So they're very spread out. Yeah, they're not going to have a great defense against these orc raids. However, there is one among them who I guess is kind of their, if they had to pick a leader, they would pick this one. And his name is Haldad. He gathers everyone that they can, and they retreat and try and find a safe place to rest and keep the women and children safe. And it says there they were besieged until their food was gone. So they're really losing this fight. Haldad has twin children, Haleth, his daughter, and Haldar, his son. And both were very valiant and brave. It says Haleth was a woman of great heart and strength. However, Haldad was slain in one of these battles, and Haldar ran out to save him and also died. And then I love this part. Then Haleth held the people together. And I love it when a woman takes charge. Yes.
Haleth is awesome. Yeah. I like that she was so amazing that their name went from the people of like Haladin to the people of Haleth. Then their whole name changed because she was amazing.
Yes. We love to see it. So she is, keeping everyone together of what's left. Everything's going, it's not going, I mean, kind of like Helm's Deep, like things are not going good. And then all of a sudden,
very much that.
There came suddenly a music of trumpets, and Caranthir came with his hosts down from the north and drove the orcs into the rivers. So Caranthir comes and helps out. He looks kindly upon them, whereas I think before when they originally came, they were kind of like, you can come and, be in our land. We don't really, give, care one way or the other, really.
They paid little heed to
But
them.
now they seem to have more.
Yeah.
It says he did Haleth a great honor. He offered her recompense for her father and brother. And he said to her, if you will remove and dwell further north, there you shall have the friendship and protection of the Eldar and free lands of your own. However, Haleth was proud and unwilling to be guided or ruled. And this is also very much the mindset of the Haladan, because remember, they didn't really have lords. They were all spread out and they had their own little areas that made their own rules. So they're very much not people that they are going to be ruled by one person. And so she's like, thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah.
We're going to do our own thing. I think, where do they go? Just says into.
So she takes them west, I believe.
West, yeah. So they go west, and it says they took Haleth for their chief, which I think is kind of funny that when Caranthir is like, hey, why don't you come up north and you can, be under the protection of the Eldar? They're like, no, we don't have any lords. But then Haleth becomes their chief.
I think that's also a sense of like, Caranthir could have helped them sooner, like. He paid little heed to them. He ignored them when they were there, and then they get attacked. A lot of them get killed. They're in a siege for 7 days, and then her brother and her dad is dead. And then he comes in to save them at like the last moment, and he's like, I can help you out now that like I've seen that you guys aren't cowards. Which I think from Haleth's point of view would sting a little and be like, you could have helped sooner. You could have done something sooner. So I get that the people aren't going to be like exactly so grateful to Caranthir for his last-minute rescue, especially because they're such a proud people. But, Haleth, who led them and, saved them, I could totally see them following her.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, so they go to Estelad. Mm-hmm. They become the people of Haleth. It says that she did not wed. Love that. We love an independent woman. Mm-hmm. But the headship, after she dies, passes on to her nephew. So they're in Estelad, things are going good, but she desires to move westward again. And though most of her people were against this council, she led them forth once more. So I think that's really interesting that a lot of people, they were like, we really don't want to move, but like they clearly have a level of respect for her that they go with her anyway. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem that this journey that they take is the greatest decision, because it says it's very perilous. That they go through paths that are no roads for mortal men to take without aid. She brought her people through it with hardship and loss, constraining them to go forward by the strength of her will. So it sounds like a very hard journey that maybe wasn't the best decision.
Yeah, the wording almost reminds me of the elves crossing the Helcarax.
Yeah.
It was tough. Nowhere near that level of bad. But, for humans crossing that path. And that's the place that, I don't know if it's been mentioned yet, but that's the place they crossed through is the place where Ungoliant's sort of descendants, those spiders, lived. And it was always a terrible place. And there's the assumption that a lot of them died on that journey and like had a terrible time trekking across that path.
They eventually make it to the Forest of Brethil, which is under the realm of King Thingol. However, it's not in the Girdle of Melian. Had it not been for Finrod interfering, they would have been, fought or kicked out or whatever. But Finrod obtained a grace for the people of Heleth, that she should dwell free in Brethil upon the condition only that her people should guard the crossings of Teglin against all enemies of the Eldar and allow no orcs to enter their woods. Which I think is fair, considering Thingol could easily, I guess, fight them or whatever. I mean, he could also just let them be there peacefully.
Yeah. Well, I think, but also Thingol sort of just said that it's his. Like, it's outside the girdle, but Thingol is like, yeah, that's also mine, so you can't live there.
Ours.
Yeah. You can't live there.
And Haleth responds, this is so interesting, where are Haldad my father and Haldar my brother? If the king of Doriath fears a friendship between Haleth and those who have devoured her kin, then the thoughts of the Eldar are strange to men. So I don't know. Yeah, she's just like, it's weird that he doesn't care to have any kind of a friendship with me. Interesting.
Yeah, that's a slow clap moment. That is a slow clap moment where she's just like, so you think that I'm gonna let Morgoth, who killed my family, just come straight through? It's like, no, of course I'm gonna kill the orcs on sight. Like, what do you think we're gonna do? It's like, well, you don't understand that we're gonna fight Morgoth? Then we don't understand elves at all. Yeah.
They stay there until Haleth dies, and they bury her in a really, I don't know, beautiful place, and that's those are the people of Haleth. Who I guess are no longer the people of Haleth because she died.
Yeah, at this point it's sort of wrapping up the story, and it's just like, yeah, the elves lived, so now the humans are living in these different places, and some of them become their own lords in the elf kingdoms, right? And that's where it talks about that's where it talks about the humans being given kingdoms.
Oh, here we go. So it mentions Hador Lorindol, son of Hathel, son of Magor, son of Malak Eredon. Anyway, he becomes the mightiest of the chieftains of the Edain. And eventually the language that their people meld into becomes the common tongue of Numenor, which I just noted because I know Numenor becomes important, or Numenorians become important at some point, even though we haven't really gotten into talking about what exactly that is.
Yeah, they're a while away.
This is clearly, the introduction to that, the foundation that we'll see grow. Then we get to this wonderful paragraph that I was losing my mind at.
I saw this TikTok.
yeah, I tagged you in it. Oh my gosh, so crazy. It's a whole paragraph just about the sons of Hador were Galdor and Gundor, and the sons of Galdor were Hurin and Huar, and the son of Hurin was Turin, the bane of Glaurung, and the son of Huar was Tuar, father of Arendil, the blessed. That was one sentence.
I gotta say though, on a reread, this is one of my favorite paragraphs on a reread because there's so many name drops.
And I'm not going to read the rest of these because it's like 4 more sentences like that. It does say Boromir, who is not our Boromir from Lord of the Rings, obviously. And also, I was just laughing so much because one of these names is Bregolas. Which is so ridiculous. Because it sounds like a ship name between Brago, the horse, and Legolas.
Oh no, that's not even where my mind went. No. I was thinking some version of like Boromir and Legolas, but
or Boromir, but Bregolas. I was also just thinking, is that like the bro name for Legolas? He's like a Brogolas,
That's what his boys call him. That's what the boys call him in
oh my gosh, yeah, Brogolas. Yeah, that's what Gimli and Aragorn call him in, the moments that we don't see in the book or on the movie. Anyway, all this to say, eventually one of these people leads to Beren, who wins the love of Luthien, who is again Thingol's daughter. And from them came Elwing, the wife of Arendelle, and all the kings of Numenor after.
That whole paragraph is basically saying, so the sons of Hador had children that went all the way down to Tuor, who had a son called Erendil. And on the other side, the son of Boromir, that went all the way down until they had Beren, who married Luthien, who eventually had Elwing. And then Erendil and Elwing marry, and they have Elrond and Elros. And Elros sets up the Numenorians. So it's sort of mentioning the 2 sides of the family tree that comes together to create the Numenorians, and also every other important person.
I was reading this paragraph, and I'm like, a lot of these names sound important, or like they will be important.
Yeah.
But how am I supposed to know who any of these people are yet?
At the moment, it's a reread.
I'm sure
book.
I will. Yeah, I'm sure I will come back and like refer to that paragraph and be like, oh, okay, that's who that is.
Yeah. I think all of those people are mentioned again, and like 4 of them have their own book.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, yeah, I recognize Huron because there's the Children of Huron book. So,
yeah.
And then obviously Turin, or Turin.
Turin is Huron's son. Yeah.
Is that one of the
That's of Turin Turambar.
Yeah, of Turin Turambar. So yeah, we'll definitely return to some of these characters in the future. Things are progressing well for the men. It says, in those days, the strength of men was added to the power of the Noldor, and their hope was high. The thing with Morgoth, it's not done, but it's somewhat contained for the moment. It mentions the houses of the 3 men multiplied. There's one house that are all like blonde and blue-eyed, except for Turin and Morwen, who are all dark and brown hair with gray eyes. And I don't know why those details are important, but Tolkien makes sure to tell us.
It mentioned Turin specifically because Turin, I think Turin's mother, so Turin's father is the House of Hador, but Turin's mother is the House of Beor. So Tolkien, for some reason, at the end of the chapter, tells you what all these people looked like. So at the end, he's like, oh yeah, by the way, Beor had brown hair, Hador had blonde hair. Like at the end is like, oh, this like that's not even relevant to him. At the end is like, oh, this is what they look like, by the way.
By the way. Yeah.
This is all the cool things they did, and this is what they look like.
Things are going, they're going pretty good, as well as they can be when you have, Morgoth there. And I'm like, it sounds too good. It sounds like things are going to go bad quickly. Spoiler alert, the next chapter is called Of the Ruin of Beleriand and the Fall of Fingolfin.
Oh, yes. Yeah, everything's going well. There's peace. You turn the page and the next chapter. Well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Even, it does say the Edain, remember, they're mortal. However, their lives are lengthened when they come into Beleriand, but of course they still have to die. And it says, at last, Beor the Old died when he was 93 years old. 44 years of which he served Finrod. And it says, when he lay dead of no wound or grief, but stricken by age, the Eldar saw for the first time the swift waning of the life of men, and the death of weariness, which they knew not in themselves, and they grieved greatly for the loss of their friends. So this is like I just can't imagine being an elf, and then all of a sudden, like, someone just like Beor just like doesn't wake up or whatever, and they're like, what happened? I don't get it.
No, it must be
I don't get it. Did someone come and stab him? Like, what happened?
It's crazy. Yeah, I think from the perspective of the elves, it's so weird. Like, death is such a weird thing, because the only way they die is like when you get killed in battle, and it's like this dude who just grows old and dies would be such a weird concept for them. So this is this is like really their first experience with it. And all I was picturing is in Fellowship, after they leave Moria and they're reeling from the loss of Gandalf, and there's that shot of Legolas and he just looks so confused because he's like, what? I've never seen someone die before. What? I just picture like Finrod sort of poking him and being like, why isn't he waking up? Wake up.
Wake up. Hello.
Yeah.
The Edain continued to learn from the Eldar. Their houses and their sons multiplied, and they would never look upon the light of Valinor. The end. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you on the internet?
I am on TikTok mostly. If you just search at Anex Wilson or FantasyAnex, I will be there. YouTube, I have a bunch of stuff on there, and I will have more in the future. So again, that's just Anex Wilson on YouTube, and at Twitter as well, Anex Wilson. Just everywhere, same name.
Awesome. That's What I'm Talking About is a proud member of WBNE. If you want to learn more about the network, you can go to WBNE.org. The cover art is by Vaishon Brandon. You can support him on Instagram at Vaishon Designs. You can get merch for That's What I'm Talking About by going to tpublic.com/user/talkingaboutpod. You can follow the podcast on social media at talkingaboutpod, and you can follow me on Twitter at MCWatsUp and on Instagram at MCTurndownForWhat. If you want to support the podcast, you can become a patron. Go to patreon.com/talkingaboutpod to explore the different tiers and perks that are available. Another special shout out to all of my patrons. If you are ever wondering, hey, what is this support going towards? You guys just helped me renew my Podbean subscription for the next year. So that means I can keep bringing the podcast to you. So that is what that support went to this month, and I wholly appreciate it. And another shout out to this week's sponsor and our newest patron, Guy. I know it sounds like I'm just making up a new person and I just thought of the vaguest name possible, but I promise Guy is a real person who just became a patron, and I appreciate your support, Guy. As always, if you like what you're listening to, please make sure to rate and review. Thank you for coming on. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
No, thank you for inviting me. This was a blast to go through that chapter in so much detail. I think I picked up stuff that I had never picked up before or read, because I was sort of going through it and was like, I need to know this chapter properly. So yeah, that was fun. And I'm looking forward to listening to the rest of
I'm glad you had fun.
The rest of the episodes, because you're getting to some really good stuff.
I hope I'm getting to some really good stuff now.
Well, the good luck with Turan if names are a problem, because that guy has 12 names, and he comes up with a new one every other paragraph. So good luck with that one.
Oh no. And that's what I'm talking about.